Snow fell softly over the quiet town of Asheville, North Carolina. It was one of those December nights when the wind hummed low through the pine trees and the world seemed wrapped in silence. Streetlights cast warm yellow halos on the ground, melting the edges of the snowflakes before they touched the pavement. And there, just outside the small county hospital, sat a little girl no taller than the bench she perched on, her tiny legs swinging back and forth beneath a red winter coat. Her name was Lily Parker, and she was only 6 years old. Every night after the nurses dimmed the lights on the third floor, Lily would appear. She carried the same worn-out teddy bear with one missing eye, Milo, tucked tightly in her arms. Her cheeks were always pink from the cold, her brown hair escaping from under a knitted hat that looked handmade perhaps by her father. No one knew exactly when she started coming. Some said it had been weeks. Others whispered that it had been months. But every night at almost the same hour, the little girl would take her place on the wooden bench outside the hospital entrance and look up at one specific window, the one that glowed faintly on the third floor. Inside that room lay Michael Parker, her father, a carpenter who had fallen from a rooftop while fixing a client's home. The accident had left him in a coma. The doctor said it might take a miracle for him to wake up. Lily didn't really understand what that meant. All she knew was that her daddy was sleeping, and when he woke up, they would build the birdhouse he had promised her. Her mother had passed away 2 years before from a heart condition that no one in town had been able to help. So now it was just Lily and her father, or at least it had been. The neighbors took turns checking on her. The nurses offered her cocoa, and the guards sometimes let her sit inside when the wind grew too cruel. But Lily always said the same thing with a quiet, certain smile. "It's okay. Daddy can see me better from here." And so she stayed. From the cafeteria windows, the nurses would watch her, a small figure wrapped in red, her breath rising like mist, the teddy bear in her lap. Some nights she sang softly little lullabies she half remembered from when her mother was alive. Other nights she whispered to the window as if speaking to her father through the glass. "Daddy, I helped Mrs. Gray feed her cat today. I was very brave. I didn't even cry when it scratched me. Daddy, when you wake up, we can have pancakes again, just like before." Sometimes the wind carried her words away before anyone could hear them. But those who did, the janitor, the night nurse, even the sleepy security guard, often found themselves turning away to hide the sting in their eyes. One evening after a heavy snow, Lily arrived a little later than usual. The streets were quiet, covered in a soft white blanket that muffled every sound. She brushed off the bench, placed Milo beside her, and pulled her small scarf tighter around her neck. As she sat there, a car slowed down near the curb. The headlights dimmed and the engine idled for a moment before shutting off. From the driver's seat, a man in his early 60s watched her. His name was Edward Collins, a wealthy construction executive who owned several projects around Asheville. He had everything most people wanted. Success money, a big house overlooking the mountains, but he had lived alone for nearly 15 years. Edward had lost his only daughter, Anna, when she was about the same age as Lily. It had been a car accident on a rainy night, the kind of tragedy that split a man's life into before and after. Since then, he had buried himself in work, traveling from city to city, never staying anywhere long enough to feel anything at all. But that winter, something about the little girl by the hospital gate stopped him every night. He would see her from his car window, the small, fragile figure in red, staring at the same window as the snow swirled around her. At first, he thought she must be waiting for someone to pick her up. Then he assumed she was lost. But when he asked the hospital guard about her one night, the man simply sighed. "That's Lily Parker," he said softly. "Her father's been up there for months. She comes every night to wait for him. Says he'll wake up when he knows she's here." Edward didn't respond. He just stared at the little girl for a long time, something shifting quietly inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. That night, as he drove home through the falling snow, her image stayed with him. The way she sat so still, so patient, the way she truly believed that love could wake someone from a sleep deeper than dreams. When he arrived at his big, empty house, he turned off the engine and sat in silence. The fireplace was unlit. The rooms were dark. For the first time in 15 years, he whispered to himself, Maybe some people never stop waiting." Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Somewhere in town, a little girl in a red coat whispered into the night sky, "Good night, Daddy. I'll be right here tomorrow." And from a hospital room on the third floor, A faint flicker of movement, the smallest twitch of a hand, went unnoticed under the white hospital sheets. The next evening came colder than before. The air bit at the skin, sharp and restless, and the snow had turned to a thin glaze of ice that crackled underfoot. Yet there she was again, the little girl in the red coat, her boots leaving small prints that led to the same bench by the hospital gate. She brushed off the snow carefully, as if the bench were something sacred. Then she sat down, hugging her teddy bear eyes fixed on the glowing window above. Edward Collins watched her from across the street. He had told himself he would just pass by, just take a quick look before heading home. But he stopped again. There was something about that child that refused to leave him alone. He couldn't explain it. He had seen sadness before, plenty of it, but this wasn't sadness. It was faith, pure and quiet, the kind of faith he'd long forgotten existed. He parked his car, slipped on his gloves, and stepped out into the cold. The sound of the door closing startled her. She turned quickly, clutching her bear tighter. Her eyes were large, brown, and uncertain. For a moment, Edward felt guilty. He must have looked like some stranger from another world with his expensive coat and polished shoes glinting in the streetlight. "Evening," he said gently, keeping his voice low. "It's cold tonight. Shouldn't you be home?" Lily blinked up at him, then shook her head. "I can't. Daddy's still sleeping. I promised I'd be here when he wakes up." Her words were soft, but they pierced through him. He hesitated before speaking again. "Your father's inside, the man in room 302. She nodded, her lips curving in a proud little smile. "That's right." "How do you know?" I asked the guard, he admitted. "He told me about you. You've been waiting every night." Lily nodded again, her breath fogging in the cold air. "Daddy likes it when I talk to him. The nurse said he can still hear me even if he's sleeping. So I tell him about my day. That way he won't feel lonely." Edward swallowed hard. There was a lump in his throat he couldn't quite explain. The last time he'd heard words like that had been years ago from his own daughter. She used to wait for him by the window whenever he came home late from work, waving her little hand until he waved back. That memory now hurt like an open wound. He sat down slowly on the edge of the bench, keeping a respectful distance. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Lily Parker," she said, as if reciting something important. Then tilting her head, she asked, "What's yours, Edward?" He replied, "Edward Collins." She studied him for a moment. "You don't look like a doctor." He smiled faintly. "No, I'm not. I build things, houses mostly." Her eyes lit up. "My daddy builds things too. He's the best builder in the world. He was fixing a roof when he fell." "But it's okay. He's just taking a long nap." Her innocent certainty broke something inside him. He looked away, blinking against the sting of the wind, or maybe his own tears. "You must miss him very much," he said. Lily nodded, her small voice trembling just a little. "I miss his pancakes, and when he carried me on his shoulders. But I'm not sad all the time. Daddy says brave girls don't cry too much." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Edward whispered. "He is," she said firmly. "He can fix anything." Edward smiled again, but this time it was a sad smile. "Can he fix broken hearts too?" Lily tilted her head, thinking hard. Then she reached out one mittened hand and touched his arm. "Maybe, if you tell him where it hurts." For a moment the world stood still, the snow, the wind, the sound of the city in the distance, all quiet as if holding its breath. Edward stared at her, this tiny girl who spoke like an angel, and he felt something inside him thawing. The cold that had lived in his chest for years began to soften. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" he asked after a while. "There's a diner down the street. We can bring it back here if you'd like." Lily's eyes widened. "Can we get one for Daddy too?" He nodded. "Of course. One for your dad, one for you, and maybe one for me." She giggled softly, standing up and brushing the snow off her coat. "Okay, Mr. Edward, but Daddy likes marshmallows." He couldn't help but laugh, the sound surprising even himself. "Then marshmallows it is." As they walked together toward the small diner, their footprints stretched side by side in the snow. One set large and deliberate, the other small and light like tiny commas in a long forgotten story. Later, when they returned, Lily placed a cup on the bench beside her and whispered toward the hospital window. "Here you go, Daddy. It's still warm." Edward sat quietly beside her, sipping his own drink. For the first time in many years, he didn't feel alone. Something about that small act, 2 cups of cocoa in the cold night, made the silence around them feel almost holy. And as he looked up at the window on the third floor, he thought he saw a faint flicker of movement behind the curtain, as though someone somewhere had just heard the sound of love calling their name. Over the following week, Edward found himself driving to the hospital every evening without even realizing it. What had started as a quiet curiosity had become something he couldn't turn away from. Each night, Lily would already be there, her red coat bright against the snow, her small hands wrapped around a cup of cocoa. She always saved one for him, calling it Mr. Edward's brave drink. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat in silence, looking up at the third-floor window that glowed softly against the winter sky. It felt strange but comforting, like sharing grief without having to speak it aloud. Lily told him about her days at the little public school down the road, how Mrs. Gray, the neighbor, helped her with breakfast, and how she was learning to read her favorite storybook by herself. "It's called The Little Engine That Could," she said proudly. "It's about not giving up, even when things are hard. Daddy likes that one, too." Edward smiled at her determination. "Seems like you and that little engine have something in common." She laughed, the sound bright in the frozen air. "Maybe, but Daddy says I'm already strong." He didn't tell her that he believed her father might never wake up. He couldn't bear to. Her hope was too pure, too sacred to touch with reality. One night when Lily had to leave early because of school, Edward lingered by the hospital door. Inside, the halls smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. He hesitated before walking to the front desk. "Excuse me," he said quietly to the nurse on duty. "I'd like to check on a patient. Michael Parker, room 302. The nurse, a tired woman with kind eyes, glanced at him. "Are you family?" Edward hesitated, then said softly, "A friend." She nodded and flipped through the chart. "Mr. Parker's condition is stable, but—" Her voice trailed off. "The hospital can't continue his current level of care without payment. His insurance ended months ago. We've been covering what we can, but we're a small facility. There's talk of transferring him to a state unit soon." Edward's brow furrowed. "A state unit," she sighed. "Long-term care. Minimal equipment, fewer nurses. It's not ideal, especially for someone in his condition." He stood there in silence, the fluorescent light buzzing faintly overhead. For the first time in years, he felt anger burn in his chest. Not the kind that comes from pride or ego, but from helplessness. He imagined Lily sitting outside in the cold, waiting for a father who might soon be moved to a place where she couldn't visit. "Is there anything that can be done?" he asked quietly. The nurse looked up at him, almost pleading. If someone could cover part of the outstanding costs, the hospital would continue his care. But it's a large amount. Edward didn't ask how much. He simply nodded and walked away. That night, he didn't go straight home. He sat in his car across from the hospital engine running, lights off. Snow drifted across the windshield like ghost. For a long time, he stared at the building, the faint, steady glow from room 302. He thought about his daughter Anna, about how she had looked the last time he saw her, the rain, the sound of sirens, the unbearable stillness after. He had been powerless then. Money, success, influence, none of it had mattered. But now, for the first time, he could do something. He could save someone else's child from growing up alone. The next morning, Edward called the hospital administrator and requested to pay Michael Parker's medical expenses anonymously. He didn't explain why. He didn't want gratitude or attention. He only wanted to protect the fragile little world that Lily had built around her father's bed. That evening when he arrived, Lily was waiting with 2 cups of cocoa again. She handed one to him, her mitten brushing his hand. "Daddy had a good day," she said cheerfully. The nurse said his heart was strong today. Edward smiled, though his throat felt tight. "I'm sure he's getting stronger because he knows you're here." She nodded with certainty. "See, I told you he can hear me." Then she looked up, curious. "Do you have someone who waits for you too?" "Mr. Edward?" He froze, caught off guard. The question was innocent, but it opened an old wound. "Not anymore," he said softly. "I used to." She studied him for a moment, then smiled in that quiet, knowing way only children can. "That's okay. You can wait with me. We can both wait for Daddy together." Her words warmed him more than the cocoa ever could. He didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded. And so they sat side by side as snow began to fall again, 2 lonely souls finding comfort in each other's company. From the hospital window above, the faint glow of room 302 shone like a promise, unaware of the man below who had just changed everything. Winter deepened in Asheville, painting the town in shades of silver and white. The hospital roof glistened with frost each morning, and the trees along the parking lot bowed under the weight of snow. Christmas lights began to appear on porches and lampposts, flickering like tiny stars trying to outshine the cold. Lily's routine never changed. Every evening she arrived with her little red coat, her wool hat pulled low, her cheeks glowing like apples. Sometimes she carried drawings she'd made for her father, stick figures of her and Daddy holding hands under a bright yellow sun. She would tape them to the hospital window before sitting down beside Edward. "Do you think Daddy can see them?" she asked one night, pointing at her newest picture. Edward smiled. "I think he can feel them, even if his eyes are still closed." Lily nodded, satisfied. Then she leaned her head against his arm, a gesture so natural it made his heart ache. She trusted him completely without question. And for a man who had spent years building walls around himself, that trust felt like a fragile gift he didn't deserve. Later that night, when Lily had gone home, Edward walked inside the hospital again. The halls were quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the squeak of a mop against the tile floor. Room 302 glowed faintly ahead. He stood by the doorway for a long time before stepping in. Michael lay still, his face pale but peaceful, his chest rising and falling with the slow rhythm. Edward hesitated, then pulled a chair closer and sat down. "Hello, Michael," he said softly, his voice rough. "You don't know me, but I've met your little girl. She's remarkable, brave, stubborn, and full of hope. She reminds me of someone that I used to know." He paused, glancing at the silent machines. "I lost my daughter once. Her name was Anna. She was your Lily's age when it happened. I never got to say goodbye. And for a long time I thought maybe I didn't deserve another chance at anything good." The room was still except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Edward leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But your girl, she's teaching me something. She believes that love can wake people up. Maybe she's right. Maybe that's how miracles start." He sat there for an hour, just talking about Lily, about the snow, about life. When he finally stood to leave, he noticed something that made his heart skip, a faint twitch of Michael's fingers beneath the blanket. He blinked, unsure if he'd imagined it. The monitor's rhythm remained steady, unbroken. Yet he felt a tremor of hope, small but real. The next morning, Edward found himself at his daughter's grave for the first time in years. The cemetery lay quiet under the snow, the headstone softened by white drifts. He brushed the powder from her name, Anna Collins' beloved daughter, 1999-2010. He knelt down, breath misting in the cold air. "I met a little girl, sweetheart," he whispered. "She reminds me of you, the way she laughs, the way she believes the world can still be kind. I thought I'd forgotten how to feel that way. But she's showing me I haven't." His gloved hand rested against the stone. "If you can hear me, maybe help her father. Help him wake up. She deserves that." When he returned to the hospital that evening, Lily was already there, bouncing excitedly on the bench. "Mr. Edward," the nurse said, "Daddy moved his hand today." "Just a little, but he did." Edward froze, heart hammering. "He did?" "Yes," she said, eyes wide with joy. "See, I told you he's listening." He sat beside her, unable to speak for a moment. The joy on her face, the innocence in her voice, it felt like sunlight breaking through the clouds. "That's wonderful news," he finally said. "Maybe he's getting ready to wake up." Lily nodded, clutching her bear tightly. "I knew it. Daddy never breaks a promise." They sat together, watching the snow drift around the lamppost. Edward could feel something inside him shifting, a gentle loosening of the grief he had carried for so long. When he drove home that night, the town lights glowed softly through the falling snow. He turned off the radio and let the quiet fill the car. For the first time in 15 years, his thoughts didn't hurt as much. Instead, they felt warm. And when he closed his eyes that night, he dreamed of two little girls, one with golden curls, one in a red coat, holding hands and laughing under a winter sky. The snowstorm came without warning. By morning, Asheville was buried beneath a white hush so thick that even the sound of the church bells was muffled. The roads shimmered with ice, and the wind howled down the empty streets. Edward stood by his window, staring out at the swirling flakes. For the first time in weeks, he knew Lily would not be waiting by the hospital gate tonight. He told himself not to worry. Children caught colds. Storms passed, yet the silence that filled his house felt heavier than it should have. After pacing for an hour, he grabbed his coat and keys, ignoring the weather warnings flashing on the radio. When he arrived at the hospital, the bench outside was empty, snow piling on the seat where Lily always sat. He brushed it off with a gloved hand and looked up at the window of room 302. The light still glowed faintly. Inside that room, a man lay waiting, and now so did Edward. He went inside to find Nurse Emma at the front desk. She looked up surprised. "Mr. Collins, you shouldn't be out in this weather." "Where's Lily?" he asked, his voice tight. Emma frowned. "She's home. Came down with a fever last night. Mrs. Gray called to say she couldn't come out in the snow. The poor thing's been asking if her father woke up yet." Edward exhaled slowly, relief and worry tangling in his chest. "I'll check on her," he said quietly. Before he left, he stopped by room 302. Michael lay still as always, though the color in his cheeks looked a shade warmer than before. Edward sat beside the bed, resting his hands on the cold metal rail. "Your little girl's sick," he murmured. "You've got to wake up now, Michael. She needs you." He hesitated, then continued, his voice breaking. "You know, I used to think I understood what loss was. But then I met Lily. That child she's hope made small enough to hold in your hand. She believes in you more than anyone I've ever met. Don't let her lose that." The monitors hummed softly. The storm raged outside. And somewhere in the middle of all that sound and silence, Edward thought, or maybe only imagined, that Michael's hand twitched beneath the blanket. He stayed there until nightfall, listening to the wind scrape against the window. When he finally stood to leave, he whispered, "If you can hear me, fight your way back to her." The next morning, Edward drove through the snow to the small house on Maple Street where Lily lived. Mrs. Gray, the elderly neighbor, opened the door wrapped in a thick shawl. "Mr. Collins," she said warmly, though her face was tired. "You must be frozen. Come in." Inside, the air smelled faintly of medicine and cocoa. Lily lay on the couch beneath a quilt, her little face pale, her teddy bear clutched tightly against her chest. "Mr. Edward," she whispered when she saw him, her voice raspy. "Did Daddy wake up?" He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Not yet, sweetheart. But he's trying. I think he's listening." She nodded weakly. "Can you tell him something for me?" "Of course." She closed her eyes, whispering, "Tell him I'm not scared anymore. Tell him I'll wait, even if I have to wait forever." Her words hit him like a prayer, pure, small, and strong enough to shatter the walls he'd built around his heart. He stayed with her until she fell asleep, her breathing soft and even. Then he stood, his hands trembling slightly, and went back to the hospital. That evening, Nurse Emma met him in the hall, her face alight with surprise. "Mr. Collins, something's happening in room 302. Edward hurried in. The air in the room felt charged, humming like a secret about to be told. Michael's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then steady. He blinked at the ceiling, his lips parting with effort. Lily," he croaked, voice rough and unused. Edward froze, disbelief flooding him. "She's safe," he whispered. "She's waiting for you, Michael." A tear slipped down the man's cheek. His hand moved again, slow but certain, reaching weakly toward the sound of Edward's voice. "Who are you?" "Someone who loves your little girl too," Edward said, voice breaking. Michael's eyes closed briefly as if gathering strength. "Tell her, Daddy's coming home soon." Edward pressed his hand over Michael's. "You just did." The monitors beeped steady and strong. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to pause, as if the whole world were listening. Later that night, Edward returned to Maple Street. Mrs. Gray met him at the door, astonishment shining in her eyes. She woke up asking for him, she said softly. Right after 8, just like every night she used to wait, Edward stepped into the room. Lily was sitting up now, pale but smiling, her small fingers gripping her teddy bear. "Daddy woke up," she said simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "Didn't I tell you, Mr. Edward? I told you love always works." He knelt beside her, his vision blurring. "Yes, you did, Lily. You were right all along." Outside, the storm began to quiet. The snowflakes drifted slower, softer, like feathers falling from heaven. Inside that little house, a girl, a father, and a man who thought he'd forgotten how to love all found warmth again, not from the fire, but from each other. And as Edward left that night, he looked up at the winter sky and whispered to the daughter he'd lost long ago, "Thank you, Anna. You sent me where I needed to be." By the time spring came to Asheville, the snow had melted into quiet rivers that ran down the hillsides, feeding the fields below. The hospital roof no longer glittered with frost, and daffodils pushed through the thawed ground, yellow and alive. The whole town seemed to breathe again after the long silence of winter. Michael Parker was walking for the first time since the accident. Each step was careful but strong, guided by the steady hand of Nurse Emma. It had taken weeks of therapy and willpower, but the sight of Lily waiting at the end of the hall had been all the motivation he needed. Every time he faltered, her small voice echoed in his mind, "You can do it, Daddy. I believe in you." Now, as he stepped outside into the sunlight for the first time in months, Lily ran to him, her red coat replaced by a yellow dress that fluttered in the warm wind. She threw her arms around his waist, laughing and crying all at once. "You did it, Daddy. You're really standing." Michael knelt down, tears shining in his tired eyes. "I told you I'd come home. Didn't I?" Behind the madame, Edward stood by the car watching the reunion with quiet joy. He hadn't expected to stay in Asheville after winter ended, but something had changed inside him, something he couldn't name. For years he had measured his life in profit margins and construction deadlines. Now he measured it in laughter, in the sight of a small girl's smile, in the warmth of a friend's gratitude. When Lily saw him, she ran over and took his hand. "Come on, Mr. Edward. Daddy made pancakes this morning. You have to taste them." "They're his best ones," Michael chuckled as Edward hesitated. "You'd better listen to her," he said. "She's the boss of the house." Edward smiled, a real smile, the kind he hadn't felt since before his daughter passed away. "I'm honored to be invited," he said softly. At the Parker home on Maple Street, sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, glinting off a plate of golden pancakes. The little wooden house had been repaired with Edward's help. New beams, fresh paint, and a hand-carved birdhouse now hung by the porch, just as Lily had always dreamed. Inside the table was small but full pancakes, syrup, laughter, and something invisible yet powerful, a sense of belonging. As they ate, Lily chattered about her plans for summer. "We're going to plant flowers, right?" "Daddy and Mr. Edward will build the fence," Michael nodded. "That's the plan," Edward laughed. "I don't remember agreeing to that." "Yes, you did," Lily said seriously, mouthful of pancakes. "You said anything for my favorite girl." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I suppose I did." After breakfast, they all stepped outside. The air was crisp with the scent of wet earth and new beginnings. Lily skipped toward the birdhouse, pointing proudly. "The birds already moved in. Look, Daddy, they like our home." Michael lifted her into his arms. "That's because it's built with love." Edward looked up at the small house hanging under the porch beam. A pair of robins fluttered inside, their soft chirps echoing across the yard. He thought of his own empty mansion on the hill, silent, untouched. And he knew he didn't want to go back to that life. "Michael," he said quietly, "I've been thinking I could use a good carpenter at my company, and maybe a part-time pancake expert too." Michael smiled, understanding. "You're offering me a job?" Edward nodded. "And maybe offering myself something too. Family." The two men shook hands, a silent promise between them. Lily clapped her hands, beaming. "That means we can all have pancakes forever." They laughed, and the sound filled the little yard like music. As the sun climbed higher, Edward sat on the porch steps watching Lily chase butterflies. For the first time in 15 years, the ache in his chest had quieted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small locket. Inside was a faded photo of his daughter, Anna. He whispered, "You were right, sweetheart. Love doesn't end. It just finds new places to grow." Lily ran back and leaned against his shoulder. "What you looking at, Mr. Edward?" He smiled and closed the locket gently. "Just someone who helped me find you." She tilted her head, thinking, "Then you should say thank you." He looked up at the sky, the blue wide and endless. "I already did." And as the breeze carried laughter through the yard, the three of them stood together beneath the bright spring sun, a family not made by blood, but by the quiet miracle of love that refused to give up. Today's story comes to an end, but its echo still lingers in the heart. What do you think? Give us a score from 1 to 10, and feel free to share a few words in the comments. Every voice here is valued and heard. Before you go, let me ask you gently, are you doing okay today? If your heart feels heavy, let this place be a quiet corner where you can share and find comfort. See you again in the next bedtime story, where love and hope remind us that no matter how dark the night may seem, kindness will always prevail.